Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the At the Kitchen Table podcast. I am Jason Klink, your host, and I appreciate you joining me today and pulling up a chair to the kitchen table. Today, I want to have a conversation about building something of your own professionally, even when you know there's a real possibility that it could completely fail. Not struggle for a while, not take longer than expected, not turn out differently than you imagined. I mean, fail. The business could close, the idea could go absolutely nowhere, the money can run out, the customers might never come, the partnership might not work out. You could invest years of your life into something that never becomes what you believed it could be. That is not exactly the kind of motivational opening people expect, is it? Usually, when we talk about starting a business, changing careers, creating a product, launching a podcast, or pursuing something independently, we focus on the success story. We talk about believing in yourself, taking a blind leap, working harder than everyone else, and refusing to quit. There's nothing necessarily wrong with those messages. Belief matters, hard work matters, persistence matters, but they do not guarantee anything. You can believe deeply in an idea and still be wrong about the market. You can work incredibly hard and still run out of money. You can do almost everything right and still have the timing work against you. That is the uncomfortable part of building something of your own. At some point, you have to accept that effort and outcome are not always directly connected. So the question I have been thinking about recently is, what if somebody starts something and they try to succeed? The real question is building this still worth doing if I might fail? I think that is much more of an honest conversation. When you work inside of an established organization, there is usually some kind of framework already in place. There is a title, a job description, a schedule, a chain of command, and a definition of what success looks like. You may not always agree with that framework, but it does exist. When you start building something of your own, much of that structure disappears. Nobody tells you what deserves your attention today. Nobody guarantees you that what you're doing will produce a result. Nobody hands you a map showing where the next 6 months will take you. You create the structure while trying to operate inside of it. That sounds exciting, and sometimes it is. It can also be exhausting. There's nothing better than building the plane while you fly it. There are days when you feel like you are creating something meaningful. The conversations are productive. The vision feels clear. You can almost see the future you are trying to build. Then there are days when nothing seems to move. The emails go unanswered. The sales do not close. The numbers, they just don't make sense. The technology doesn't work the way it should. A person you were counting on changes direction. An opportunity you believed was almost certain disappears without much explanation. On these days, it becomes very easy to question everything. Was that idea actually good? Did I misunderstand the opportunity? Am I wasting time? Should I have stayed where things were a lot more predictable? And one of the hardest questions is probably, what will people think if this does not work out? I believe that question stops more people than actually the risk of failure. It's not always the financial loss that scares us most. Sometimes it's the public nature of trying. Once you tell people that you are building something, they start watching. Some people support you. Some people are curious. Some people quietly expect you to fail. Others may not be thinking about you nearly as much as you imagine, but you still feel like they're watching. Now your attempt has become part of your identity. You are the person who started the company. You are the person who left that secure position. You are the person who said this idea could work. That creates a whole lot of pressure because if the business fails, it can feel as though you failed personally. But I think we have to separate these two things. A project can fail without the person being a failure. A company can close without its founder becoming less intelligent, less capable, or less valuable. An idea can be unsuccessful while still teaching you things that you could have never learned by sitting on the sidelines. That does not mean failure does not hurt. It does not mean we should pretend that every failed business is secretly a victory. Sometimes failure is simply just painful. People lose money, relationships are strained, confidence takes a hit. There can be an embarrassment, disappointment, and real consequences. We do not have to romanticize it, but we also do not have to allow the possibility of failure to make every decision for us. I've spent much of my professional life working in environments where failure has a very serious meaning. In public safety, you train, plan, prepare, and create systems because the consequences matter. You learn to evaluate risk. You learn not to confuse courage with recklessness. That mindset does not simply disappear when you move into business or begin building something new. In some ways, it becomes even louder. You want more information. You want certainty. You want to know that if you invest time, money, and energy, the outcome will be worth it. The problem is that entrepreneurship does not offer that kind of certainty. You can research the market, you can talk to potential customers, you can create projections, you can build a strong team, you can test your assumptions, and you should do all of these things. But eventually, there is still a decision that cannot be completely protected by research. At some point, you have to act without knowing how that story ends. That is where I think the real internal conflict begins. Because most of us do not only want an opportunity, we want an opportunity with a guarantee. We want to take a risk after the risk has been removed. We want to build something original while already knowing that other people will accept it. We want the freedom that comes with ownership. We also want the security that comes from someone else being responsible for that outcome. Those things do not always exist together. Building something of your own means accepting a different relationship with uncertainty. You stop asking, how do I eliminate every possible risk? You start asking, which risks am I willing to carry and why? And that why matters. If the only reason you are building something is to prove people wrong, that motivation may not last. If the only reason is to make money quickly, the early stages may become frustrating very, very fast. If the only reason is that entrepreneurship looks exciting from the outside, reality will probably challenge that impression. There needs to be something underneath the goal. Maybe you see a problem that you genuinely believe needs to be solved. Maybe you want more control over the work that you do. Maybe you want to create something your family can be proud of. Maybe you've reached a point professionally where continuing to ignore an idea feels more uncomfortable than pursuing it. Maybe you simply need to find out where you are capable of creating. None of these reasons guarantee success, but they can give you meaning to the attempt. And I think there's a difference between chasing success and building something meaningful. Success is usually measured by an outcome: revenue, growth, customers, recognition, influence, or even an eventual sale. Meaning can exist during the process. Meaning can come from creating a team. If it comes from solving one person's problem even before you have solved it at scale. It can come from learning how to lead without the authority of a formal title. It can come from discovering that your original idea was wrong and having the humility to change it. It can come from becoming more disciplined, more patient, and more honest with yourself. That does not pay the bills, and I understand that. Believe me, I do. A business eventually has to work as a business. But when we evaluate the experience only through the financial or final financial outcomes, we may overlook what the process is doing to us along the way. I sometimes wonder how many people are living with an idea that they will never test. Not because the idea is bad, but because they cannot accept the possibility that it might fail. They are waiting for the right time, the perfect plan, enough money, complete support from the people around them, or some clear signal that says, now you are safe to begin. That signal usually does not come. There may be a better time, there may be a smarter plan, there may be a responsible preparation that still needs to happen, but there will probably never be a moment where every doubt completely disappears. The question becomes whether the doubt is warning you about something specific or merely protecting you from discomfort. Those are not the same thing. A legitimate concern can be investigated. Do customers actually need this? Can I afford the initial investment? Do I have the required experience? What legal, financial, or operational risks exist? Those are responsible questions. but fear often speaks in broader terms. What if I am not good enough? What if everyone sees me fail? What if I regret trying? Those questions cannot always be solved with another spreadsheet or a planning session. Sometimes you have to decide which regret you would rather carry. Would you rather regret trying something that did not work or regret never discovering if it could work? The answer will be different for everyone. Not everyone needs to start a company. Not everyone needs to leave their job. There is no moral superiority in entrepreneurship. Working for someone else does not mean that you lack the courage or ambition. This is not a conversation about telling everyone to quit tomorrow and follow a dream without considering the consequences. It is about being honest when something inside you keeps asking to be built. Maybe it is a business, maybe it is a consulting practice, maybe it's a nonprofit organization. Maybe it is a book, a podcast, a professional service, or a new approach within the career you already have. Build something of your own does not always require burning down the life you currently have. Sometimes it starts quietly. You work on it before the rest of the house wakes up. You give it a few hours at night. You talk to people who might actually use it. You create a small version before attempting the large version. You test whatever the idea can survive outside of your own head. That kind of approach is not a lack of confidence. It's more of a disciplined risk. And maybe that is an important distinction. There is a difference between being willing to fail and planning carelessly. Being willing to fail means accepting that the outcome cannot be guaranteed. Planning carelessly means ignoring information because it conflicts with the outcome that you truly want. You can be bold and still question your assumptions. You can believe in the vision and still listen to the criticism. You can stay committed to the mission while changing the product, the strategy, the timeline, and even your role. Sometimes people are so attached to proving that they were right that they stop paying attention to what reality is telling them. That is not persistence, that is just pride. Real persistence may require an adjustment. The thing you eventually build may look very different from the idea you started with. That does not necessarily mean you abandon the vision. It may mean you learned enough to build a better version of it. I think one of the most difficult parts of creating something professionally is knowing when to continue and knowing when to stop. When you hear plenty of stories about people who refused to quit and eventually succeeded, we hear fewer stories about people who continued too long, invested too much, and ignored every time that it was time to make a change. There's no simple formula for that decision. Sometimes the business is struggling because success takes time. Sometimes it is struggling because the model does not work. Sometimes you need patience. Sometimes you need a pivot. Sometimes you just need to walk away. And walking away does not automatically erase the value of what you built. Maybe the business fails, but the experience leads to a completely different opportunity. Maybe you discover a skill you did not know you had. Maybe you meet people who become important in the next chapter of your career. Maybe you become a better leader because now you understand what it feels like to make decisions when there's no guaranteed paycheck and no organization standing behind you. Or maybe you simply learn that you do not want to build another company. Even that is valuable information. There is no, check that, let me try that again. There is dignity in learning something through experience instead of spending the rest of your life imagining an alternative version of yourself. I also think we need to talk about the emotional side of building something because it can be isolating. People around you may care about you and still not fully understand why you are doing it. They may see the long hours, the stress, the financial uncertainty, and the sacrifices. From their perspective, the obvious question may be, why would you choose this? And there may be days when you cannot give them a convincing answer. There may be days when you are not sure yourself. That is why having honest people around you matters. Not people who agree with everything you say, not people who call every idea brilliant. You need people who can support you without feeding your ego. People who can challenge your thinking without trying to destroy your confidence. People who can remind you why you started, why you're Still being willing to tell when something is not working. Building something of your own does not mean building it alone. Ownership and isolation should not be confused. The strongest builders I've met are often the ones who know when to ask for help. They find advisors, partners, mentors, colleagues, and customers who are willing to be honest. They understand that the idea may belong to them, but the best version of it will probably require input from many people. As I think about my own professional path, I realize that one of the biggest challenges has been learning to become comfortable being unfinished. When you build something, there is always another problem to solve. The website could be better, the product could be stronger, the message could be clearer, the process could be more efficient. You could know more, prepare more, and improve more. That can become an excuse to hide. At some point, you have to allow people to see the work before it feels completely ready. You have to allow yourself to be a beginner in public. That may be one of the most vulnerable parts of the entire process. When you have spent years becoming experienced in one profession, starting something new can feel like surrendering part of your competence. You are used to knowing what to do, then suddenly you're asking basic questions again. You are making mistakes that feel obvious after the fact. You're learning in front of other people. But maybe professional growth requires seasons where we are willing to be inexperienced again. Maybe the desire to always appear competent can become its own limitation. So let me bring the conversation back to the original question. Is building something of your own still worth doing when you may completely fail? I cannot answer that for you. I can only tell you how I've been thinking about it. For me, the possibility of failure does not remove the value of building. It forces me to become more honest about why I'm doing it. It encourages me to measure progress in more than one way. It truly reminds me to manage the risk responsibly while understanding that I cannot eliminate it. It pushes me to ask whether I am creating something because it matters or because I want the identity that comes with creating it. And it makes me think about what I would say to an entire group if the entire thing ended tomorrow. Would I wish I had never started? Would I feel that the time had been wasted? Or would I be grateful that I was willing to see the idea through far enough to discover what it could become? I do not think the goal should be to become fearless. Fear contains information. Fear reminds us that the decision matters. The goal is to keep fear from becoming the only voice involved in the decision, because there should also be curiosity. There should be purpose. There should be responsibility. There should be an honest understanding of the consequences. And somewhere in that conversation, there should be room for possibility. So I want to leave you with a few questions to think about today. What have you wanted to build professionally but continued to delay? Are you delaying because the plan needs more work or because you're afraid of being seen trying? What would responsible action look like? Not reckless action, but one practical step that would allow you to test the idea. And perhaps most importantly, if the idea failed, what would still make the experience worthwhile? I would really like to hear your perspective on this. Have you built something that did not work? Did that experience change the direction of your career? Are you currently building something and question whether you should continue? Or are you standing at the beginning trying to decide whether the risk is worth taking? Share your thoughts in the comments, send me a message, or bring the conversation to your own kitchen table. Because I do not believe that success is the only story worth discussing. Sometimes the more important story is why we are willing to begin without knowing how it would end. Thank you for spending time with me today and pulling up a chair to the kitchen table. I appreciate all of your feedback and your comments. This is episode 10 of At the Kitchen Table podcast. And as always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. And until next time, keep having the conversations that matter. Have a great day.